Good morning. My name is Steve Snyder. I'm part of Westminster's Echo Justice team, and we are pleased today to partner with Westminster's Social Justice Forum to do the presentation today for this forum. The Social Justice Forums are built around a common theme. The program theme for this year is Moving from Understanding to Transformation, Effecting Change Together, Guided by God. Through these forums, we want to explore capabilities we need to build and norms we need to examine to be effective transformation partners in our community. This morning, I'm pleased that we have Russ Henry to be our presenter. Russ is a naturalist, a gardener. He's been doing landscape work since he was in high school. A soil health expert, we'll find out what that means later, and an educator. He is speaking on creation care, restoring God's handiwork in our own backyards. Russ will tell us how we can create eco-friendly landscapes in our own yards, including the work we can do this fall to get ready for the spring, right? That's right. Okay, good. Now, as part of our ongoing effort to promote respectful conversations around concerns of the community, the social justice team established guidelines for social justice forums that you will now see on the screen. Okay, thank you. There we go. We'll take just a moment to read over this. These will guide our performance. Our conduct. Thank you. Okay. We'll all be in compliance. We do this with the youth when we are doing retreats and such, that we make sure that everybody kind of understands the rule, treating people fairly and the like. And I doubt that we'll have any real strong arguments about gardening today, but who knows? Who knows? So we will just have to follow these rules. Before we get started, just a couple of rules on the logistics. If you're here with us in the Meisel room, Russ has indicated that he'd like to take comments or questions as he is speaking. So feel free to raise your hand here in the Meisel room and we'll bring a microphone over to you. You need to ask your question or make your comment with the microphone so that the others can hear you, and also those who are viewing this in the live stream can also hear what your question or comment is as well. So raise your hand if you have a question or comment here in the room. For those participating on the live stream, please put your comments or questions in the chat. And we have Pete over here is monitoring that. And he'll raise his hand, Russ, if there's a question coming in on the chat, so that we can address that. So before we get started with Russ, let's ask for guidance through prayer. I have a short prayer. Creator of the universe, God of justice, breathe into us today a spirit of curiosity and humility. Help us engage with mindfulness, listening to voices from our community. Guide us as we seek together to steward the creation. Amen. So please help me welcome Russ Henry, our speaker today, to tell us about ecological gardening.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you all very much for attending today. My name is Russ Henry, and I'm the owner of Minnehaha Falls Landscaping. And I just want to take a moment to introduce my family here in the back of the room. My wife, Chesney, and her mother, Kim, and then my beautiful sons, William and Patrick. They're 15 months old. So we're all really happy to be here today. And this is their first time at church. I got in trouble there, didn't I? Well, I am a landscaper, and as you'll see as I begin speaking here, I'm a nerd as well, and those are kind of my basic qualifications. I am not a theologian, not a Bible expert. I was raised in the church, and so I've got a vague familiarity with the Bible, especially the very beginning. And we all know what happens at the beginning of the Bible. You could maybe say it with me. In the beginning, God creates the heaven and the earth. Yes, and what wonderful gifts God has made for us with the heavens and the earth. And as a landscaper and a business owner, I'm an employer. I have 20 employees, and so I get the opportunity to have a look at people's days at work and help them examine their day at work. And I thought maybe we could together take a look at God's first day at work here. So if God's making the heavens and the earth there in the first day, well, we've all had days at work like that, right? Before lunch, you're very busy, get a lot done before lunch. You know, God made the whole observable universe right there in that first part of the verse there, 93 billion light years across, approximately 1 septillion stars. So very busy there before lunch. And then after lunch, he kind of got focused in on the details and made the earth. And so glad are we that God really focused in on the details there after lunch and spent so much time crafting the earth, because the earth is our spaceship. It's how we're alive here in the middle of outer space. We really require a place to be in order to be. And God has made this amazing planet. And really, while creation is so amazingly large, here we are together on this planet, all alone. Okay? We're all alone together. We can't go anywhere else. Earth is our home. We have a lot of fiction and science fiction that takes us to the stars in our imagination and lets us leave the planet anytime we want. But that's not real. Yeah, well, a few people have been to the moon. They couldn't be there for very long, and they had to come home pretty quick. And so we're really, really limited here on Earth. If we were to venture outside of the atmosphere, Earth is, the outer space is minus 453 degrees. It's even colder than winter here. If we were to try to get to the nearest star to the sun here, that's 4.25 light years from Earth. The fastest man-made object ever was the Parker Solar Probe. It's a spacecraft that went and took pictures that crashed into the sun. And that thing flew at 535,000 kilometers per hour. It would still take us 21,000 years moving at that speed to get to Proxima Centauri, the nearest other star. We're here alone together. The Earth is our spaceship. And God made us an amazing spaceship. And on that spaceship, we have a life support system that makes it so that we can live here. That life support system is called soil. Soil keeps us all alive. Soil is where all life came from. Soil health equals climate health. Let's look at this for a moment. Over here in the orange, we see that enhanced carbon storage in soils could reduce atmospheric carbon by 50 to 80%. We could take 50 to 80% of the excess carbon in the atmosphere out just by improving the way that we farm and landscape, by the way that we manage soils. And what we should understand is that about half of the carbon, the excess carbon that's in the atmosphere, is actually from the destruction of ecosystems. It's from forests being cut down and prairies being tilled. This has happened worldwide. Soil health equals clean water. So for every 1% increase, we got a helper, all right. For every 1% increase in soil organic matter, we can hold an additional 20,000 gallons of water per acre. And that's very important because the soil cools and cleans and filters the water. And then soil health equals ecosystem health. So one thing I really like to think about is all the life that's teeming underground. For instance, 80% of the Minnesota native bees are ground nesting bees. They live in the soil. All kinds of other creatures live in the soil. Who knows some other creatures that live in the soil? worms? How about beetles and rabbits and ants and foxes and burrowing owls? All kinds. Salamanders, frogs, they all spend time in the soil. Everybody lives in the soil. We're very much in a soil-bound ecosystem. So let's use our powers of observation here and learn a little bit more about the natural world. Well, what is healthy soil? If it's so important, what really is it? To answer that, let's look at the difference between soil and dirt, and let's look under the microscope here. So we've got a couple of images, both magnified 400 times. On top we have dirt, on the bottom we have soil. When I, as a qualified nerd, look at this, I see that on top here we've got a lot of shiny bits in this field. Those are all pieces of sand, silt, and clay. In a dirt or a very early stage succession soil, we don't have anything binding these pieces of sand, silt, and clay. They're just free floating in the soil profile. And when water runs through that material, it just takes all those pieces and collapses them down on top of each other. That's what happens in dirt, is we get compaction layers forming on the top of the dirt. If this was a moving image, we'd see that the tiniest pieces in here are shimmering back and forth. Those are bacteria that have not yet aggregated. So as soils mature, bacteria have a sticky substance on the outside of their bodies. It's called glomalin, and they stick together, and they form these microaggregates. So this is soil. Soil is filled with life, and soil has, first, as the kind of most basic form of life, has microaggregation of bacteria sticking together, and as they stick together, that sticky substance helps them bind up the pieces of sand, silt, and clay into those aggregates. And now those pieces are held apart from one another and surrounded by bacteria. So now there's room for air and water to flow through the soil profile. There's still some shiny pieces in here, but far fewer, because we've got the aggregation happening. And because there's aggregation happening, who knows what this guy is? That's right. We've got some soil health experts in the room. And this is a nematode. And nematodes eat bacteria, fungi. The good guy nematodes, the beneficials, eat bacteria and fungi. And if you have aggregation happening in your soil, then you are more than likely to have beneficial nematodes. If you don't have the aggregation happening in your soil, the root rot nematodes will come along and start eating from your plant's roots in a anaerobic soil system. So what we want to create is life in the soil. And we want to have an intact soil food web, starting with the bacteria and moving into fungi and other organisms. And all of that activity in the soil, the bacteria and the nematodes and the fungi, they're all feeding off of plants. See, plants are out there photosynthesizing. That equation on top is photosynthesis. The plants are taking carbon dioxide and combining it with water to make sugar and oxygen. And they're using that sugar to do two things. About 60% of it they're using to grow their own bodies. So seeds and shoots and stalks and roots, flowers, the whole bit. And then about 40% of the sugar, they're just emitting through their roots in what we call root exudates. And those root exudates are just to feed bacteria and fungi. In fact, the whole soil food web, all of this complex life, all these organisms, they eat from the organic matter and the sugars that the plants are putting in the ground. The sugars and organic matter feed first the bacteria and fungi. You gonna come help? Yeah, you helping? Good job. I love you. Yeah, come here. Yeah. And then everything else eats off of the fungi and bacteria. So the bacteria and fungi are the kind of basis, the foundation of the soil food web. And then the nematodes, the protozoa, the arthropods, you can see the creatures kind of get bigger and more complex as they move up in order, and everything is eating from one another. The birds are eating from the arthropods, and the arthropods are eating from the nematodes. Everybody's in there eating from one another and cycling the nutrition around, ultimately all coming from the plants, and then a lot of that nutrition is going back to the plants. Here we've got another up close of a nematode, and This is a slide that I like to use to point out a couple things. One, nematodes can be identified, and this is some real nerd talk here, so I won't go too deep into it, but they can be identified by their mouth parts. And so we see this kind of sword-like object in the nematode's mouth. That's an indicator that he's a bacterial-eating nematode. He eats the bacteria, and they slide past that sword, and they get opened up, and then he starts digesting them. And then as he's done digesting them, the nematode leaves the waste behind on the plant's roots, and that's how the plants get food. The bacteria are like filled with nitrogen. They're like little fertilizer bags. And as they're eaten and the waste is left behind, then they feed the plants with all of that nutrition. There you go. Good job. It's good to have helpers. So that's one way that the plants get their nutrition, is by all that nutrient cycling, one creature eating another, leaving the waste behind. And the other way is through the mycorrhizal fungi. And we can really see that here apparently in this slide, as we've got the baby pine, and we can see the kind of tan, kind of brownish colored roots that are coming off of it. And then we see this huge array, this web of white material coming off. And that white material are the fungi in a mycorrhizal relationship with the plant. And as these roots are connected to the plant, what's happening is the roots are out there in the environment, or the fungi is out there in the environment, and it is mining the soil for nutrition. So it's actually dissolving organic matter and sand, silt, and clay, and it's piping that nutrition back to the plant in exchange for the sugar that only the plants can make. Every plant on the planet has this relationship with fungi. Every plant, every species of plant has to have mycorrhizal relationships with fungi. And there's other fungi that live inside the plants, that endophytic fungi that will also feed the plants from inside the plants. And so there's several ways in which the soil fungi is absolutely key to feeding plants and keeping them alive. So when we're talking about soil, we're really talking about a collection of living creatures, including fungi and bacteria and all those other organisms that we saw. And this, again, is soil magnified 400 times. Here, we can see the fungi growing in and around through the soil. These are called fungal hyphae, and those white pieces that we saw on the last slide, those are tens of thousands of strands of these combined. And so these actually crawl inside the plant root pores and can then start extracting that sugar that the plant is giving it in exchange for the nutrition and water. These fungi give the plants about 1,000 times more ability to get water and nutrition out of the soil. Okay, so now let's look quickly at healthy water. We've got a big cycle of water on Earth. In fact, there's a couple of cycles of water on Earth. We've got the evapotranspiration cycle, where water is coming through the ground and evaporating and going up through the trees, transpiring out of the plants and raining down as precipitation. And then as it rains down, the water is filtering through, it is meant to filter through healthy soil, through the fungi and bacteria, and the fungi and bacteria clean the soil, cool it, and then allow it to return underground into the local waterways. And that's how all of the water on the planet has cycled to keep us in clean water, to keep us and all the rest of the animals healthy, so that we have these amazing ecosystems that filter and cool and clean the water and allow for health and life on the planet to prosper. Healthy ecosystems. So here, let's look at Minnesota. When, before colonization, so before a couple hundred years ago, this is what creation looked like on the planet. This is what creation looked like in Minnesota, what God made here. 18 million acres of prairie, the entire southern half of the state. 21 million acres of wetland in Minnesota. 31.5 million acres of mature pine forest, the entire northern half of the state. That's what God left here, sitting on the ground. And then our ancestors came. And so what have we done? Let's review our work now together. How has our day at work. God had a really amazing day at work. How does that compare with what we've done? Well, let's start. 99% of the prairies were destroyed. The 1% of prairies that remain are completely fragmented. 100% of the Minnesota old-growth forests were cut down. We cut down so many forests, we could have filled train cars to the moon and back with logs, with pine logs. 50% of the wetlands have been removed. In Minneapolis, 88% of the wetlands. There's 22 lakes in Minneapolis now. There used to be about twice as many. And we just filled them in, and then we filled in the wetlands, and we built buildings on them. 50 Minnesota species have gone extinct. Another 130 are threatened with extinction. This is just in the last couple hundred years. Rusty patched bumblebee, which is our Minnesota state bee. Everybody know the rusty patched bumblebee? Yeah. That one is endangered, and if we see it in our gardens, then we're seeing something that may not be here a generation from now. 86% of the lakes in southwest Minnesota are unswimmable and fishable because they have cyanobacteria in the water. That is blue-green algae, and that can kill. It can cause all kinds of problems. Yes, sir.
99% of prairies were destroyed. That's quite a bit, and the prairies are still producing all sorts of food and corn and soybeans and so on. So they weren't really totally destroyed, seems to me.
Well, the difference between a prairie and a soybean or cornfield is so vast that they are not the same thing. And so when I say that the prairies were destroyed, what I'm talking about is the ecosystems of the prairies, not a cornfield. So the soil was all destroyed. The dirt is still there, but it's buried under corn, and it's not accessible to the ecosystem. So, so I really do mean it. Destroyed, gone. And in fact, here, this is from an article I wrote for the Longfellow Nokomis Messenger. And this line in here really kind of shows me, how it really helps us review our work as the sons and daughters of colonists. Sucker and red horse, these types of fish, would each spring swam from Lake Harriet through the outlet into Minnehaha. Settlers, even from Eden Prairie and miles to the west, brought their spears to harvest bushels of these fish to eat and feed to pigs. Farmers could and did go down with pitchforks to pitch the fish out on the banks for their fish fry. So this shows me two things. Not only was this land so amazingly productive that you could go down and put a pitchfork into the stream and pitch out fish. You imagine putting a pitchfork into any stream? You might get a shoe, But then also, we just fed them to the pigs. It's just plunder. We came to this amazing place, and we absolutely plundered it. And here's what we replaced those prairies and all those ecosystems with. We replaced them with corn, soy, lawn, and pavement. In Minnesota, we have 8.5 million acres of corn. We have 8 million acres of soy. We have more than 3/4 of a million acres of lawn. And while it's hard to find numbers on pavement in Minnesota alone, there's 27.5 million acres of pavement in the U.S. These are the four horsemen. This is what we've done to destroy our life support system. Because all of these spaces, the soil is dirt. There's no life in the soil. We've killed the soil in all of these spaces. It's all dirt. In all of these spaces, we use pesticides. The pesticides kill all the fungi in the soil. Remember that tree with the roots that gives it 1,000 times, the fungi connect to the roots, gives it 1,000 times more capacity to get nutrient and water? When we use herbicides on our lawn, repeatedly, we kill that fungi in the soil. And then we wonder why our trees get diseases. Because that fungi is no longer there to feed and protect the trees from pathogens. We're using these pesticides, and they catch us in what we call the kill-cause effect. It's a spiral-like effect where let's say we're trying to kill the weeds in the cornfield, so we use an herbicide, but that killed the fungi too, and so now then a pathogen comes in. Well, now we've got to go and use fungicide, and then that's going to kill, and so now we're killing something, and we're causing the next symptom with what we're using to kill. So it's the kill-cause effect. It's a synthetic snare. Here we can see it evident just down the street, Loring Park Pond. And this is something that Chesney, my wife, and I, we were the chairs of the Minneapolis Parks Pesticide Advisory Committee. And one of the reasons that we helped form that committee and get that committee going in the first place was because of this series of treatments that lasted for 4 years. This guy here, that blue stuff coming out, that's Roundup. He sprayed it. They sprayed Roundup from boats onto the cattails in Loring Park Pond. They did it for 4 years in a row. And after doing so, after the third year, I went down and took samples. This is from my microscope. That's what blue-green algae looks like, cyanobacteria. It was the predominant life form in the lake at that point. And then this is the result. You see this algae and duckweed-covered pond, and that's where the cattails used to be. And cattails are their habitat. They're habitat for all sorts of birds, and fish lay their eggs, and turtles and frogs. And when we use Roundup, it's not an herbicide. It's a broad-spectrum biocide. It just kills. It kills everything. And really, it's the same with all of the pesticides. They just are broad spectrum biocides. They really kill much further than the intended target. Salt contamination. Here, read this here. 1 teaspoon of salt permanently pollutes 5 gallons of water. Again, we're just examining how we live here. And let's imagine if 1 teaspoon of salt permanently pollutes 5 gallons of water, how many teaspoons are coming off of those MnDOT trucks that were following on the freeway in the middle of winter? We bring in mountains of salt. We ship up mountains of salt up the Mississippi, coming from all over the world, and then we just spread it all over it, and it really is killing our bodies of water. All of this is causing compaction in the soil. The repeated use of pesticides and tilling and salts is causing compaction. Soil should rather look like this, and instead we've got this compaction layer, and the roots barely have any ability to grow through it. There's multiple compaction layers. The extreme compaction layer down here that will not allow water to soak down into the lower layers of the water table. And this is causing real-world problems. And so we see all sorts of flooding happening throughout the U.S., around farmland where the water used to just soak into the ground, and now it's just kind of all over. It's kind of running over and going and flooding into local waterways. And we can see here, this is a picture that we should all be very familiar with. We've got the clean wooded watershed of the St. Croix flowing and combining with the muddy Mississippi. This is the Mississippi is a agriculture, a rural and urbanized watershed that is not wooded, and so we get this very muddy mixture, this water should very much more look like this than this, and so we're really, the Mississippi alone, every time we look at it, should be an enormous warning sign to us that we're doing everything wrong in the landscape. We have removed 1/3 of the world's forests, an area the size of the U.S. There is a dead zone in every single bay of every single city, a coastal city in the world. Every big coastal city has a dead zone in the water where things cannot grow. And this number keeps changing. I keep on having to increase that number. 424 parts per million. It's the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere right now. We have no idea where we're headed with climate change. We're in deep trouble. And again, all of this goes back to soil. We can do better. We can do a lot better. I given this. I was showing Chesney this presentation. By the time I got to this slide, she said, "This is a real bummer." So, yeah, you're right. So I want to show us all how we can do better together. What can we do together? Well, there are ways that we can manage ecosystems so that we're not creating all this destruction, so that we're actually regrowing the biological diversity that is supposed to be here. And so at Minnehaha Falls Landscape, we've identified these kind of 4 basic ecosystem types that we help people install and maintain in their houses. We've got bee lawns, pollinator gardens, prairie restoration, and various kinds of forests. So let's look at that. Who's heard of a bee lawn before? All right, this is a very educated crowd. We love bee lawns. Bee lawns have fescue, white clover, purple self-heal, pink creeping thyme, blue-eyed grass, and yarrow. And they can also have dandelions, they can have creeping Charlie, they could have chickweed. All those little blooms are feeding somebody. And you know what's not feeding somebody? Kentucky bluegrass. Doesn't feed anybody. But all the little blooms and all the little weeds are feeding bees. In fact, the bee lawn, the white clover in the bee lawn alone feeds 55 species of Minnesota native bees. That's awesome. Plus honeybees. That's just with the white clover. You add in the self-heal and the thyme and the rest, and you get at least 10 more species of bees. So in our yards, we could easily be feeding 60 plus species of native bees just by letting the weeds grow, or by aerating and overseeding with some of the bee lawn seed mix. So next time you see a dandelion in the spring, don't discount it. That's a really good little plant. That's helping a lot of not just bees, but moths and butterflies and ants and beetles. All kinds of organisms are feeding from the weeds in our lawn. Let's see. Oh, and while we're on this point, anybody here heard of No Mow May? Yeah, No Mow May. Okay, so No Mow May is, the basic idea is don't mow for the month of May in order to let the flowers bloom in your yard, the weeds bloom, so that the bees have a place to eat, because in the early part of the season, there's fewer plants to forage from. However, let me just back up a second, because No Mow May is a kind of cultural creation that started in England. And England is further north than us, much. So much so that our May is like their April. So, did I say that right? Their April is like our May. Did I say that right? Am I saying that right? Anyway, they're earlier than us. So if we're going to no mow May, we should no mow April, is what I'm trying to say. Our important blooms, when there's nothing else available, that's April for us. May, we know everything's blooming in May, right? We get the crab apples and the apple trees and the pears. Everything's blooming in May. But in April, it's really just those weeds and a few other tree species that are blooming. And while we're on the topic of trees, it's important to mention that the pollen, even from wind-pollinated trees, is very important in the ecosystem. It feeds lots of bees and butterflies and ants and beetles. All sorts of important organisms are eating from even wind-pollinated trees. So bee lawns, great way to have. And by the way, a bee lawn is no mow, and it's drought resistant. So if you really love mowing and watering the lawn, just totally ignore this stuff. But if you'd rather get some of your time back, a bee lawn can be a great way to go. Pollinator pocket gardens. This takes the concept of the bee lawn and grows it a little bit higher, taking a space of lawn, maybe 100 square feet or so, and dedicating that to growing Minnesota native pollinator plants. Anything from lobelia to Joe Pyeweed to echinacea to milkweed, all of our favorites. Rain gardens are a form of pollinator pocket garden. Who here has heard of a rain garden? Nice. Rain gardens are, of course, a swale in the land where the water from our roofs or our driveways can go and filter into the garden and get cooled and clean as it goes down into the ground before it enters the local waterway. And a lot of folks are having rain gardens built in their properties. In fact, this is a rain garden here, and you can see they really just are from the point of view of just looking at them, they just look like a garden until you see that the swale has been dug out to create kind of a ditch for the water to go into. And then we do prairie meadows where we take over entire lawns with prairie plantings. Here we can see this is a Nokomis neighborhood house in which this is just after planting a couple of years ago, and then this is 1 year later. And we're achieving this kind of growth, this robust growth rate, by using compost in the soil, and then by cover cropping. After we plant the big 6-inch perennials, we use seed of bee lawn seed mix, and it has white clover in it. That white clover is a legume, and legumes add nitrogen to the soil as they grow. And so they're actually adding the main nutrient that all other plants need, and they're feeding the rest of the plants in doing so. So we got just incredible, robust growth rates, so much that, see these arborvitae that are on the side there? Those were in when we started, and they belonged to the neighbor. And the neighbor has really commented, wow, you just made my arborvitae grow so much faster with the clover. So we can really achieve a functional kind of mini prairie or meadow in anyone's yard, even in the middle of the city. And then we go, if we want to get even bigger and add more layers of canopy and get even more robust with our biological diversity, then we move into food forests. And that's where we start planting edible, especially native, berry and foliage and nut-producing plants that we can eat from, and that the animals, the wildlife can eat from as well. So this is from our Minneapolis house, and here you can see the backyard is just entirely, we've got a big patio and walkway, but then it's entirely food forest surrounding that. So there's no lawn to mow, and very little, this is extremely low maintenance. I go through this once a year with a long-handled pruner and cut off the elms that are trying to grow up in the cherries, and it's very easy to manage. There's a few of our favorite fruits in here. We've got Nanking cherries. That's what these look like. They're a 6-foot-tall cherry shrub, and they're a very sweet, they're a fairly sweet cherry. They're sweeter than anything else we can grow in Minnesota for cherries. They're stemless cherry, and they come true from seed. So if you get a Nanking cherry and plant the seed, it'll make a cherry producing shrub that you can take seeds off of and give to your friends, and they can all grow out the cherries. Then we've got honeyberry up here. Who's heard of a honeyberry? Oh, they're so good. Have you had them? Oh, you did? Oh, good. Nice. Do you like them? Oh, I'm sorry.
Hopefully this next year I'll get some.
Okay, yeah, I hope so too. Once it establishes, they are a robust producer, so you should probably get a bunch of berries. We have to fight the robins for them. Well, we just let the robins take most of them. But we get out there and get, they taste like blueberries, but they're kind of oblong. And they're much easier to grow than a blueberry. They don't require soil acidification. So just add some compost. And it's about a 6-foot tall shrub. Excellent shrubs and trees to choose for the landscape to feed people and wildlife in a food forest. And then we grow what we call the love forest, which is where we're installing those plants that are really, well, when I'm installing a baby pine seedling or an oak tree, I'm not just thinking about my lifetime. I'm thinking about my kid's lifetime. I'm thinking about my grandkids' lifetime and what's going to happen. And I want my kids to grow up knowing what snakes and frogs and toads and butterflies and bees and all this wildlife is. And you know, one really scary thing to me is that I talked to the owner of a big nursery, a big native nursery, and he's got a couple hundred acres, and they do a monarch count on it and have for the last 20 years. And it's a big native nursery, so they have all the monarch's favorite plants. So that, you know, in the beginning they used to get thousands, and they'd be counting. They'd get 2,000 to 3,000 in a single count. And last year they got 200, and this year they got 100. So when we're thinking about the ecosystem, when we're thinking about our landscape, this isn't about us. It's about life. It's about honoring God's gift to us and honoring our kids and allowing them a space that we knew, something like what we knew, the beauty and the majesty that we knew that we grew up with, letting our kids have that too. This isn't about mowing the lawn. This is about the future. So, my name is Russ Henry, And I'm very honored to be here with you. I'm the owner of Minnehaha Falls Landscape, and thank you very much for indulging me and sitting here with through the presentation. I'll be glad to take any questions you have. Yeah.
But out in Arizona where we got all that sand and stuff, what do you talk about there?
Yep. So wherever we have very challenging soil-like, tough conditions in the soil, even desert-like conditions, it is absolutely of our highest interest to make as much compost as possible to improve the soil as much as we can. There have been some amazing projects that have gone on in the deserts of Jordan, in which the deserts are being turned back into green space, using the contours of the land and stacking organic matter to make compost around the edges of the land, such that it will the land can then start to hold the water, and they're re-greening the desert. And so even in the U.S. desert, in the hottest parts of the desert, we can do that. We should start from the edges and work our way towards the middle, and we should really start thinking about how we can not only re-green the deserts, but the fact of the matter is we're kind of going the opposite direction right now, and we're expanding the deserts. And so we're desertifying by tilling and using pesticides everywhere we go. And so the less of that we could do, the better.
Well, okay, and we lived in Arizona for 20 years, had a place there.
Okay.
Well, the Minnesotans brought down grass, which really was not a good thing, and so now they're not letting them plant grass anymore.
Yeah, because they were
So
irrigating the
what's
grass
that
all
about?
over. Because they had been irrigating lawns. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I imagine.
Yeah, in the desert, not a good idea, is it?
No, I understand. You can't do it anymore.
That's good. Yeah.
Well, but
Yeah.
Minnesotans thought they were bringing life down there, which they were not.
Yep. Sometimes we confuse the color green for ecosystems. And so, and I've heard people talk about, well, we need to get the lawn back because it's the native, and it's like, well, no, that's not how it works. The lawns are actually, they're non-native, and they're the replacement for the ecosystem. Yeah.
Valley.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I'm here visiting, but I have lived here too, and it is true. I mean, even the city of North Las Vegas, where I am, we don't have green lawns anymore, and I'm in a over 55 community where the city is limiting you can't have grass within 12 feet of a sidewalk. But they also, I always wondered why they even in Reno, they plug the soil, so there's these chunks of
Aeration?
yeah, and it kind of when you're walking your dog, that's what you think it is. But they just did that, and it's to aerate the soil. Yep. And what a lot of people don't realize, once you live in the desert, we have dandelions, we have all the green that you think of, and people think desert isn't green. But it all exists there. We have pine trees with our palm trees, and so it is possible to do it even in what people think of as a sand environment. It really is soil.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's amazing testimonial.
But they are Nevada at least has figured out that they have to make it a law, because people are obsessed with their green lawns everywhere. It's not just Minnesota. Everywhere people think that is what they have to have, and it's not good for anything. As you said, it doesn't.
Right. Well, lawns are great for one thing. They're great for developers' bottom line, because if you can build a house and then roll out a green carpet in the front and call it a day, you've spent almost no money on that green carpet, and you've sold the house for as much maximum profit. Xeriscaping. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh. Now you can't. They don't get to do it, even the contractors now. So at least
great.
Nevada's getting
That's good.
in the right track.
Excellent. Yeah, Steve.
Russ, I wanted to ask you about exotics like buckthorn. What do you think about buckthorn? Stays nice and green right into January in the backyard. But what about exotics like that?
So non-native plants are in a major way causing a lot of damage in their own way. So the way that they cause damage is just by replacing very productive plants with not as productive plants. And so what do we mean by that? Well, our Minnesota native forest plants, so oak trees and birch and pine, maple. All of these are keystone species in Minnesota, meaning that just like the keystone in a bridge, they're holding up the entire ecosystem. So oak trees, native oaks, native willows, and native cherries will each feed hundreds of species of moths and butterfly, caterpillars, and those caterpillars are food for everything. So the birds and the snakes and the frogs and the toads, and everybody's eating the caterpillars, and they're eating them in massive amounts. So baby chickadees, mom and dad chickadee are raising 2 or 3 babies for 3 or 4 weeks early summer every year. And in that time, mom and dad got to bring back how many caterpillars per baby? 3,000 caterpillars per baby over that 3 or 4 weeks. So if they've got 3 babies, they got to find 9,000 caterpillars. That's one brood of chickadees. All the birds are eating from them. Now, here's getting back to the non-native species. While a few hundred species of caterpillars can eat from oak tree, 0 species of caterpillars can eat from a buckthorn. And the buckthorn are really rapidly growing. Now, buckthorn is not evil. Buckthorn is a plant with a life strategy, and it's following that life strategy. We picked it up, plucked it out of Asia, and brought it over to the U.S., and that was a big mistake. But it's here, and it's not the only problem. When we have 16 acres up north, and when I look around, over half of the species on our property are non-native, and we don't have hardly any buckthorn. We've got a lot of non-native invasive species, as they're called, and couple things. Now, I want to offer a little caution. We use the word invasive, but that's kind of a military term, and it really assigns a kind of an evil mindset to the plant. The plant is just following a life strategy that was developed over millennia. What we need to do is work to control the non-natives by removing them and replacing them. Removal alone won't do it. If you don't replace with a native plant, you're just going to be replanting those non-natives. My favorite way to get rid of buckthorn is by using what's called the high cut method. And this is great for large areas. So the Roberts Bird Sanctuary just off of Lake Harriet here in Minneapolis, the Friends of Roberts Bird Sanctuary has been clearing buckthorn and from a 50 plus acre site over there between the lakes. And they've cleared almost all the buckthorn from there, using mostly the high cut method. And so they'll go around and they'll cut all the buckthorn that are about 1 inch or bigger, they'll cut them at chest height, and then they'll defoliate them as they try and sucker and send up leaves over the next year or two. They'll go through once, twice a year and defoliate them. Just use a machete and cut off the leaves. And then after 3 years of doing that, the tree is really trying to support that big trunk that you've left standing, but it doesn't have any foliage to create sugar to support its own life, so it has to slough off roots. It has to let roots die. After 3 years of doing that, you can come over and just knock that tree down, just kind of uproot it, pull it out of the ground, and put in some seeds or some sprouts of some native plants.
Can you give a couple other examples of?
Phragmites, that's a grass that gets about 8 feet tall. We've got it on the lakes here. It's around Muskoka and Lake of the Isles too. We've got, thistle and, all sorts of non-native plants. And they can be very challenging to control, but we're doing removal and replacement a little at a time. Mm-hmm. We're just in Ramsey, so you're much further north. Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's nice.
So for the home gardener, how do you compare compost to manure?
Manure is just compost waiting to happen. So yeah, manure just needs to be composted, and then it's great. We don't want to put raw manure into our gardens. You can put raw manure in the fall and let it compost all fall and through the beginning of the spring, and then it's pretty good to go if you only put about 1 inch thick. But you basically want to use finished compost in your garden efforts. Yeah.
Seeing all the destruction humans have made in the environment, would you consider humanity an invasive species?
We have to think about that culturally, okay? Because we are not humanity. We are one subsection, one small culture of humans. And we can think about tribal cultures that have lived with the earth, growing its abundance for their entire existence. And so we're dealing with a cultural problem, not a
So
species
some
problem.
cultures are invasive species.
Yeah. The European culture is very, very much invasive. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
I have an interest in the larger picture. Like we have agricultural universities, and we have a few people who are trying organic or are moving in the organic farming method, but it's not taking on at nearly the rate that we need. This is an urgent kind of thing, and people are not taking it urgently. So what can you say about the larger picture of what's happening?
Thanks for that question. And larger scale, what we really need to have is our institutions start to take measurements and compare land uses against each other for various ecological measurements, such as soil depth, water quality off of edge of field water quality testing, pollinator counts, these kinds of things. Because if we were, let's say we're running the city of Minneapolis, and we start to take climate change seriously, and what can we do with our land in Minneapolis? And the park board has thousands of acres of land. How can we use that land to sequester carbon? Then what we're going to start doing is we're going to compare golf courses to forests. We're going to compare grasses, our big stretches of mown lawn on the parkways, to prairie plantings, and we're going to take the numbers for how we're doing with fungi and bacteria and water quality and carbon sequestration from those various environments, compare them against another, and then start making decisions as a group together on that.
Let's thank Russ Henry for bringing these great ideas to us. Next time, Russ, we need a glossary. I think I've expanded my vocabulary by a couple of dozen words I'm quite sure I've never heard before, so we'll work on that. I understand that for the next Social Justice Forum that we're still working on some ideas. Check your church communications to find out what those are. And again, thank you, Russ, for coming in. We learned a lot today. Thank you.